At the end of Donnie Brasco, Lefty takes off his watch. He takes off his ring. He hands his valuables to his wife, walks out of the apartment, and gets into a car, knowing he's going to die. Pacino plays the scene like a man settling his debts with the world. Quiet. Dignified. Final. It's the most memorable scene in the film. And it didn't happen to Lefty Ruggiero. The FBI arrested Lefty at gunpoint to save his life. He went to prison. He got cancer. He died on Thanksgiving Day, 1994, 13 years after the operation ended. A free man, still swearing he'd kill Donnie Brasco if it was the last thing he did. That scene, the jewelry, the keys, the walk towards certain death, happened to a different man entirely. Dominick Sonny Black Napolitano. A character the film treated as background. In real life, he was the center of everything, and the way he died was nothing like the movies. The film ended in 1997. The real story didn't end at all. Every character in Donnie Brasco traces to a real person, and what happened to those people after the credits rolled is more brutal, more strange, and more dramatic than anything the screenplay contained. One was murdered by his own cousin in a parking garage in Lower Manhattan. One sued Sony Pictures for defamation and lost because the judge ruled his reputation was already too damaged to harm. One rebuilt the entire Bonanno crime family from the wreckage of the Donnie Brasco disaster, became the most powerful mob boss in New York, and then became the first sitting boss in Mafia history to wear a wire for the federal government. One walked out of federal prison in 2022 and is reportedly running the same family Pistone infiltrated, at 79 years old. And the man who started it all, Joe Pistone, is 86, still living under an assumed name, still carrying a .38, and still doesn't tell his neighbors who he is. This is what happened to every one of them. July 26, 1981. The FBI pulled Joe Pistone out of the Bonanno family after 6 years undercover, the longest and deepest Mafia infiltration in Bureau history. The trigger wasn't a blown cover or a surveillance failure. It was an order. Sonny Black Napolitano had told Pistone, still operating as jewel dealer Donnie Brasco, to murder Anthony Bruno Indelicato as a condition of becoming a made member of the Bonanno family. And the Bureau couldn't stage a murder. They couldn't locate Bruno. And they couldn't leave their agent inside an organization that had just executed 3 of its own capos in a single afternoon. A bloodbath that reshaped the family's internal power structure and put everyone around Pistone on edge. FBI agents Doug Fenkel, Jim Kinney, and Jerry Lohr drove to Napolitano's headquarters and delivered the truth. The man Sonny Black had trusted, mentored, and nearly sponsored for membership was Special Agent Joseph D. Pistone. Napolitano initially refused to believe it, but Joseph Massino confirmed it quickly, and the machinery of consequence began moving immediately. The scope of what Pistone had accomplished was staggering, and the Bonanno family was only beginning to understand how badly they'd been exposed. Over 6 years, Pistone had penetrated deeper into the Cosa Nostra family than any law enforcement agent in history. He'd been present for meetings with members of all 5 New York families. He'd traveled to Milwaukee to help the Bonannos muscle into Frank Balistrieri's gambling operations. He'd run a social club in Florida with the permission of Tampa boss Santo Trafficante Jr. He'd gathered intelligence that would eventually feed into more than 200 indictments and over 100 convictions across multiple families. The operation didn't just damage the Bonannos, it provided the evidentiary framework for the Mafia Commission trial, the Pizza Connection trial, and virtually every major federal mob prosecution of the 1980s. For all of that work, daily risk, no backup, and a persona so complete that Pistone's own personality began to blur with Donnie Brasco's, the FBI paid him a $500 bonus. The Mafia Commission, by contrast, placed a $500,000 contract on his head. Gambino boss Paul Castellano reportedly blocked the hit, reasoning that killing a federal agent would bring catastrophic law enforcement retaliation on every family. FBI agents also personally visited mob bosses to warn them against carrying it out. The contract was never executed, but it was never formally rescinded either. The man who first brought Pistone into the family, Anthony Mirra, would be dead by February of the following year, killed by his own blood, for a crime the film never mentioned because the film never mentioned Mirra at all. And the man who ordered Sonny Black's execution, Joseph Massino, would spend the next 2 decades rebuilding everything the operation had destroyed, only to destroy it again himself, in a way nobody saw coming. Before Sonny Black left for his last meeting, he stopped at the Motion Lounge, his headquarters at 420 Graham Avenue in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. The lounge was his world. It's where he ran the crew, where he held court, where he made his money through bookmaking, loan sharking, hijacking, and extortion. It's also where he kept what mattered to him outside the life. Napolitano raised pedigreed homing pigeons on the roof of the building, birds imported from France, Germany, and Russia, bred for competition, cared for with a discipline that matched anything he brought to his criminal operation. Those pigeons are in the film, but the movie gave them to Pacino's Lefty. They weren't lefties, and they were Sonny Black's. He gave his jewelry to his favorite bartender. He handed over the keys to his apartment. Not for the furniture, but so someone could care for the birds. He and Pistone used to sit in that apartment on Saturday mornings watching cartoons before the day's business started. Pistone sometimes slept on his couch. The domestic ease between them, the trust that wasn't performed but simply existed, was the emotional core of the entire undercover operation. The film gave that relationship to Lefty. In reality, it belonged to Sonny Black, a man the movie reduced to a supporting role played by Michael Madsen with minimal screen time and almost no interior life. Napolitano reportedly told someone at the lounge that he was going to a meeting and didn't know if he was coming back. He knew exactly what was waiting. Hondi Frank Curly Lino and Stephen Canone drove him to the home of Bonanno associate Ronald Filacamo. Accounts differ on the location, with some sources placing it in Eltingville, Staten Island, and others in Flatlands, Brooklyn, though the historian Selwyn Rabe's 5 Families places it on Staten Island. Capo Frank Coppa greeted them at the door and directed them downstairs. As Napolitano descended the stairs, Coppa slammed the basement door shut behind him. Lino shoved him down. Robert Lino Sr. and Filacamo were waiting below with .38 caliber revolvers. The first shot grazed him. The gun jammed. On his knees at the bottom of the stairs, Napolitano said, according to testimony from multiple cooperating witnesses who later described the scene in federal court, "Hit me one more time and make it good." Filacamo fired the fatal shots. Frank Coppa, who testified about the murder years later, said, Napolitano died like a man. August 12, 1982. Nearly a year later, a swampy drainage ditch at South Avenue and Bridge Street in Arlington, Staten Island. The body was in a hospital bag, decomposed beyond visual recognition. Dental records confirmed the identity. His hands had been severed, a specific Mafia punishment tied to the handshake, the gesture of introduction, because Napolitano's unforgivable sin was shaking the hand of an FBI agent and bringing him deeper into the family than any outsider had ever gone. A forensic discrepancy has never been satisfactorily resolved. Participants described .38 caliber revolvers and multiple shots, but the body showed evidence of a single wound from what appeared to be a .45 caliber pistol. Now, what happened in that basement may differ in specifics from what any participant later admitted. Through Napolitano's girlfriend Judy, Pistone later learned something that didn't fit the narrative of mob vengeance. Before his death, Sonny Black said he bore no ill will toward Pistone, that he'd only been doing his job, and that if anyone was going to take him down, he was glad it was Pistone. Massino's brother-in-law, Salvatore Vitale, later testified that Massino's justification for the killing was blunt. He said he had to give Napolitano a receipt for the Donnie Brasco situation. Joseph Massino was convicted on July 30, 2004, on all 11 RICO counts, including the order to murder the man who'd trusted Donnie Brasco more than anyone else in the family. And when FBI agents told Benjamin Lefty Ruggiero that Donnie Brasco was a federal agent, his response was 5 words. "He'll never go against us." He said it to his lawyer. He believed it completely. The relationship between Lefty and Pistone had been genuine on both sides, deeper in some ways than either man expected when it started. Pistone served as best man at Lefty's September 1977 wedding to his second wife Louise at New York City Hall. He ate dinner at Lefty's apartment in Knickerbocker Village on Monroe Street several times a week, the same apartment where Lefty kept elaborate saltwater fish tanks and, at one point, a pet lion cub. He helped Lefty deal with his son, Tommy's heroin addiction, a source of constant private anguish for a man whose public persona was built entirely on control and menace. Lefty's gambling addiction bled money faster than his criminal income could replace it. He was perpetually broke, perpetually borrowing, perpetually chasing the next score at the track. It was one of the details Pacino captured perfectly. The man who could order a murder without hesitation couldn't walk past an OTB without going inside. Lefty mentored Pistone in the protocols, rules, and hierarchy of Cosa Nostra. The tutorials that made Pacino's performance so textured were drawn directly from what the real Lefty taught the real Donnie Brasco over years of daily contact. He explained the structure. He explained the money. He explained what happened to people who broke the rules. He did it the way a father teaches a son the family business, which is exactly how Pistone later described it, except the business was murder and extortion, and when the father didn't know the son was recording everything. But after Napolitano's murder on August 17th, FBI intelligence indicated that Lefty was next on the list. On August 29, 1981, agents intercepted him as he headed to a meeting at Nicholas Marangello's social club, almost certainly a setup to kill him. They arrested him at gunpoint, shotguns drawn on the street. The FBI had, in a strange inversion of everything the operation was supposed to accomplish, saved a mobster's life. They offered him entrance into the witness protection program in exchange for testimony. He refused. He cited his oath of omertà. That refusal, the one act of loyalty that still meant something in a world where everything else had collapsed, reportedly earned him a pass from the family. The murder contract was lifted. He'd live, but he'd live in a cage. In November 1982, following a 6-week trial, Lefty was convicted of racketeering conspiracy alongside Nick Santora and sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. He'd been a career criminal for decades, approximately 26 alleged murders to his name, earning nicknames like Lefty Guns and Two Guns because he always carried a backup weapon on hits, knowing mob firearms were unreliable. Despite all of that, he'd never served a single day in prison before the Donnie Brasco case. Behind bars, he refused every interview request. He reportedly turned down $1 million from movie producers for the rights to his story. He gave them nothing. If you're finding this worth knowing, a subscribe keeps these coming. Lefty was released in April 1993. In his body failing from lung and testicular cancer, a lifetime of chain-smoking English Oval cigarettes catching up. He died on November 24, 1994, Thanksgiving Day, 68 years old. A free man, technically. After watching Pistone testify against him in court, His last recorded statement about the man who'd been his closest friend carried nothing of the quiet acceptance Pacino played in the film's final scene. It was a promise. "I'll get that motherfucker Donnie if it's the last thing I do." He's buried at Calvary Cemetery in Woodside, Queens. His granddaughter Ramona Rizzo later appeared on the VH1 reality series Mob Wives, still carrying the name, still orbiting that world, still dealing with what the name meant. The most dangerous man Joe Pistone ever met isn't in the movie. Anthony "Tony" Mirra was the person who first brought Pistone into the Bonanno family around 1976, the introduction that made everything else possible. Mirra had an estimated 30 to 40 murders behind him. He'd spent more than half his life in prison. Fellow mobsters feared him. Pistone described him as the nastiest and most intimidating man he encountered in 6 years undercover. He was nephew to Capo Alfred Embarato and cousin to soldiers Richard Cantarella and Joseph D'Amico, names that would reappear decades later in the final destruction of the Bonanno family. The film erased Mirra completely. His role, the initial introduction of Donnie Brasco into the family, was given to Lefty's character. But his paranoid behavior, tearing apart Donnie's car dashboard searching for recording devices, was given to Lefty as well. This is the composite character problem at the heart of the film, and it's worth sitting with for a moment. Pacino's Lefty Ruggiero is built from at least 3 real men. From the real Lefty came the mentorship role, the gambling addiction, the financial struggles, the fish tanks, the son's heroin problem, the famous lines about wise guy life. From Sonny Black came the emotional bond with Pistone, the pigeon-keeping, and, crucially, the ending, the walk to death that belonged to Napolitano. From Mirra came the paranoia, the explosive violence simmering underneath a controlled surface. The film took 3 lives and made 1 character. In doing so, it erased the man who started everything and gave the wrong man's death to the wrong man's story. If you were making this film today, knowing what you now know about Sonny Black, about Mirra, about how Lefty actually ended, which real man's story would you build the movie around? I'd be curious where you land on that. After Pistone's identity was revealed, Mirra went into hiding. He knew what was coming. Joseph Massino ordered his execution and, in the Mafia's characteristic cruelty, assigned the job to Mirra's own relatives. On February 18, 1982, cousin Joseph D'Amico lured Mirra to a parking garage at 80 North Moore Street in Lower Manhattan. While Mirra sat in his parked Mercedes, D'Amico shot him in the back of the head. The medical examiner found 4 bullet wounds, 2 behind the ear, 1 in the cheek, 1 lodging in his left knee. His body was found slumped behind the steering wheel, the engine still running. Uncle Alfred Embarato and cousin Richard Cantarella waited outside in a getaway vehicle. D'Amico eventually became a government cooperator and described the murder in detail during federal testimony. 3 men who shared Mirra's blood killed him for the sin of knowing Donnie Brasco first. 350 pounds. That's how much Dominick Big Trin Trinchera weighed when they opened fire on him in a Brooklyn social club on May 5, 1981, 7 weeks before the FBI pulled Pistone out. Trinchera was one of 3 rebel capos who'd been challenging the authority of imprisoned boss Philip Rusty Rastelli. The other 2 were Alphonse Sonny Red Indelicado and Philip Philly Lucky Giacone. Together, they'd been stockpiling automatic weapons at Trinchera's Bronx junkyard and planning to murder every Rastelli loyalist they could reach. Massino learned about the plot and struck first. He obtained approval from Gambino boss Paul Castellano and Colombo boss Carmine Persico, then arranged a supposed peace meeting at a Brooklyn social club. 4 gunmen hid in a closet wearing ski masks, among them Vito Rizzuto, flown in from Montreal specifically for the job, and Gerlando Ciaccia. When Ciaccia brushed his hand through his hair, the prearranged signal, the closet door burst open. Rizzuto shouted, "It's a hold-up." Trinchera took a double-barreled shotgun blast at 350 pounds and remained standing until sustained gunfire finally brought him down. Ciaccia shot Indelicato in the head while Massino held his leg. Giacconi tried to run but was cornered against a wall. Frank "Curly" Lino, who'd accompanied the three capos into the meeting, escaped by sprinting out the door, jumping fences through backyards, and hiding in the home of an elderly couple who had no idea what had just happened a block away. The bodies went to the Hole, a notorious mob graveyard straddling the Brooklyn-Queens border near JFK Airport. John Gotti arranged for Gambino associates to help bury them. Indelicato's body surfaced on May 28th in a shallow grave. The official story that children playing in the area found it was fabricated to protect FBI informant Willie Boy Johnson, who had actually tipped off the Queens police. Giacconi and Trinchera weren't found for over 23 years. Not until October 2004, time when the FBI excavated the Queens lot based on information from Massino himself, who had by then become a government witness. The New York Medical Examiner's Office confirmed identification in December of that year. This triple murder directly triggered the end of the Donnie Brasco operation. After the hit, Sonny Black elevated Donnie Brasco by ordering him to kill Sonny Red's son, Bruno, as his initiation murder. The FBI couldn't stage the killing, couldn't locate Bruno, and pulled Pistone within weeks. The man whose murder was supposed to make Donnie Brasco a member of the Mafia walked out of FCWAR Danbury on May 20th, 2022. Anthony Bruno Indelicato had been one of the masked gunmen who assassinated Bonanno boss Carmine Galante at Joe and Mary's restaurant on July 12th, 1979, photographed by FBI surveillance being congratulated outside a Manhattan social club just hours later. He was supposed to attend the May 5th meeting where his father was killed, but missed it, reportedly because of cocaine use. He was convicted in the landmark 1986 Mafia commission trial for the Galante murder and sentenced to 40 years, while the other commission defendants received 100 each. Released on parole in 1998, he went right back, participating in the 2001 murder of Frank Santoro, shot while walking his dog in the Bronx. Charged again in 2006, he pleaded guilty and received another 20 years. He served them. He's now reportedly the consigliere of the Bonanno family under boss Michael "The Nose" Mancuso, 79 years old, and the last surviving defendant from the Mafia commission trial. The target of the murder that would have made Donnie Brasco a made man is now, 44 years later, helping run the same family Pistone infiltrated. In 1998, a Bonanno soldier named John Sarasani sued Sony Pictures for defamation. The judge's ruling may be the most devastating sentence ever written about a mobster in a legal proceeding. Sarasani, known as Booby, had been Sonny Black's right-hand man and was famous for his physical strength. He was the one who moved Big Trinchera's 350-pound corpse after the triple murder when no one else could manage it. He'd been the only defendant acquitted in the 1982 RICO trial, weeping openly when the verdict was read. His complaint against Sony claimed that the character Paulie, originally named John Sarasani in a pre-release version of the screenplay, defamed him by depicting murder. Judge Denny Chin dismissed the case on the grounds that Sarasani was a libel-proof plaintiff. The court's reasoning, reduced to its essence, his reputation was so badly tarnished that he could suffer no further harm from anything a movie depicted. A federal judge told a gangster, in a published opinion, that even Hollywood couldn't damage his name any further. Sarasani accumulated additional convictions through the 90s and died of cancer in December 2006 at 68. The film killed Nick Santora's character on screen, shot by Lefty in a scene that was entirely invented. It's one of the most significant fabrications in the movie. And the real Nicholas "Nicky Mouth" Santora also called Nicky Cigars for the ever-present stogie, outlived nearly everyone connected to the Donnie Brasco case. Convicted alongside Lefty in the 1982 trial and sentenced to 15 years, he was released around 1992 and steadily climbed the family hierarchy, eventually becoming acting underboss under Vincent Basciano. Re-indicted in 2007 on racketeering charges. Indicted again in July 2013 on enterprise corruption, gambling, loan sharking, and drug trafficking, including the distribution of oxycodone, Cialis, and Viagra, a distinctly 21st century racket that would have been unimaginable in the social clubs of 1981. That case ended in a mistrial on May 2016. Santora died on October 27th, in 2018, at age 76, while living with his daughter in Franklin Square, New York, still awaiting retrial. He'd suffered traumatic head injuries from falls while incarcerated at Rikers Island. The man the movie killed in the 70s died in 2018. 4 decades later, still facing charges, still connected to the family that Donnie Brasco was supposed to have crippled. Nobody was allowed to say his name. If you needed to refer to Joseph Massino, you tugged your ear, earning him the nickname the Ear. That's how he ran the Bonanno family after he took control in the aftermath of the Donnie Brasco catastrophe. Boss Philip Rusty Restelli had been in prison through most of the undercover operation. Convicted of labor racketeering in October 1986, he died of liver cancer on June 24th, or 1991 at 73. Massino inherited a family in ruins. The Bonannos had been expelled from the Mafia Commission, the first of the 5 families ever removed. The other bosses cited the unprecedented humiliation of FBI penetration, the family's internal chaos, and widespread drug dealing as grounds for expulsion. Massino rebuilt with a discipline that bordered on paranoia, understandably given what had just happened. He closed every social club to deny the FBI fixed surveillance targets. He forbade the use of his own name in conversation. He required prospective members to be on record with the sponsoring man for at least 8 years before they could be proposed for induction, a waiting period designed specifically to prevent another Donnie Brasco. Under his leadership, her membership grew from roughly 80 to 110 made men. With John Gotti's backing, the Bonannos regained their commission seat in the mid-1990s. By the end of the decade, they'd become the second most powerful crime family in New York, behind only the Genovese. The structural irony embedded in this story is one the film could never have told, because it played out over decades. Being expelled from the commission, the family's deepest humiliation, actually shielded the Bonannos from the devastating 1986 Mafia Commission trial. That trial sent the bosses of all 4 remaining commission families to prison for 100 years each. Restelli had been initially indicted in the commission case, but was removed and tried separately precisely because the Bonannos had already lost their seat. The punishment designed to destroy them became, inadvertently, the thing that saved them from a far worse fate. But Massino couldn't escape the forces his own career had set in motion. By 2002, FBI financial investigations had produced a cascade of cooperators from within his rebuilt family. Frank Coppa, the very man who'd slammed the basement door on Sonny Black, became the first Bonanno-made man in history to flip. Then came acting underboss Richard Cantarella. Then Joseph D'Amico, the man who'd shot Anthony Mirra in that parking garage. Then Massino's own brother-in-law, Salvatore Vitale. The walls closed from every direction. Massino was convicted on July 30, 2004, on all 11 RICO counts. Facing the death penalty for ordering a murder, he offered to cooperate immediately and became the first sitting boss of a 5 family to turn government witness. He wore a wire inside federal prison to record his own successor, Vincent Vinny Gorgeous Basciano, confessing plans to murder a federal prosecutor. He forfeited $7 million in cash and more than 250 gold bars. Released in 2013, he entered witness protection, lived quietly in Ohio, and died on September 14, 2023 at 80 years old in a rehabilitation facility on Long Island. The man who ordered Sonny Black's execution for the crime of trusting an FBI agent ended his own life by doing the same thing, trusting the federal government to keep him safe. For 6 years of daily undercover work inside the American Mafia, the FBI paid Joe Pistone a $500 bonus. He testified in more than a dozen major trials through the 1980s, the Ruggiero and Santora RICO case, the Frank Balistrieri gambling and extortion trials in Milwaukee, the Pizza Connection trial that ran 17 months and produced 18 convictions, the Rastelli RICO prosecution, and the Mafia Commission trial itself, where his testimony helped establish the Commission's existence as a criminal enterprise and sent the bosses of 4 families to prison for 100 years each. Santo Trafficante Jr., the Tampa boss who had granted the Bonannos permission to operate in Florida, where Pistone ran a gambling club called the King's Court, was indicted on charges stemming from the operation. The judge declared a mistrial. A separate RICO insurance fraud indictment was served for medical reasons. Trafficante died on March 17, 1987, at 72, during heart surgery at the Texas Heart Institute in Houston. He'd never been convicted of a significant crime despite decades as one of the most powerful mob bosses in the country. Even the Donnie Brasco operation, which destroyed the Bonannos and damaged families across the eastern seaboard, couldn't put Trafficante away. Pistone's intelligence became the template for every subsequent FBI infiltration of organized crime. He was awarded the Attorney General's Distinguished Service Award on January 17, 1983, by Attorney General William French Smith and FBI Director William Webster. He resigned from the Bureau in 1986, and frustrated with internal politics and inadequate recognition. He wrote his book, Donnie Brasco, My Undercover Life in the Mafia, published in 1988 with co-author Richard Woodley, which became a New York Times bestseller and the basis for the film. He watched Johnny Depp study him for months before filming. Pistone's own mother visited the set, and hearing Depp's voice from around a corner, she thought it was her son. Pistone served as technical advisor on set and played a small cameo as one of Trafficante's men. He later said the film was about 85% accurate. The 20% it got wrong matters. The wife-slapping scene never happened. Pistone said he went ballistic when he saw it, but didn't outrank the director. The body dismemberment scene was invented. Pistone was never asked to carve up corpses, and the marriage counseling sessions were fiction. The $300,000 cash stash didn't exist. But the hardest inaccuracy to accept was the ending. A death scene transferred from the man who earned it to the man who survived it. In 1992, at 53 years old, Pistone requested reinstatement and completed the full 16-week Quantico training program alongside recruits half his age. He served until mandatory retirement at 57. He doesn't participate in the formal witness protection program. He manages his own security under assumed identities. Multiple sets of identifications set up decades ago, a .38 caliber pistol he still carries, a home alarm system wired directly to an FBI field office. He's relocated 5 or 6 times since 1981, as he married his high school sweetheart Maggie, a nurse from Paterson, New Jersey, in 1961. They had 3 daughters. During the undercover operation, he saw his family roughly once every 3 or 4 months, for about a day each time. He couldn't discuss the case. He spent Christmas Eve with mobsters. He admitted that his undercover persona began bleeding into his real personality in ways he couldn't always control. The family relocated to an undisclosed state for protection. All 4 took on new assumed identities. Pistone has said that nobody knows who his family are. Maggie reportedly passed away in 2025. Their daughters' names and locations remain completely hidden. At 86, Pistone exists in a contradiction. He launched a podcast called Deep Cover, appeared on Joe Rogan in July 2025. He maintains an Instagram account and lectures at law enforcement conferences worldwide. He does all of this publicly under his real name, because his real name is the one nobody recognizes in a grocery store. His neighbors don't know who he is. The $500,000 contract remains technically open. He told UPI in 2021, "They have long memories." He said it matter-of-factly, the way someone might mention the weather. 40 years of living with a price on his head had turned it into background noise. Present, constant, unremarkable. Calvary Cemetery, Woodside, Queens. The oldest and largest cemetery in New York City. 4 million burials across a landscape so vast it has its own internal road system. Lefty Ruggiero is buried here. So is Sonny Black Napolitano within the same grounds. The man the film showed walking to his death and the man who actually did. Their headstones carry nothing that announces who lies beneath them or what happened between two men and an FBI agent in a social club in Williamsburg 44 years ago. The pigeons were given away after Sonny Black left for his last meeting. Nobody kept them for long.